Welcome to another episode of Omni Athlete. You're here because, like us, you believe that sport is a vehicle for elevating global consciousness. But you know that elevating consciousness through sport only matters if it actually helps you to achieve a peak performance state, get in the zone, and compete at your highest level. We created this show to highlight the world's highest achieving mind, body, and spirit competitors to unveil for you a side of sports that most never see and rarely know exists. Okay. So today's guest is someone who quite literally has the distinction of being all-world. He is the only lacrosse goalie in the history of the game to have won an NCAA championship, 2 by the way, an ILF World Championship, and an MLL Championship. As the son of a Hall of Fame lacrosse coach, he was practically born with a lacrosse stick in his hands. But his list of accomplishments on the field actually pales in comparison to what he has done and intends to continue accomplishing off the field. His time at the pinnacle of lacrosse allowed him to see the power sport has as a container for what ultimately is the reason why we compete in the first place: growing, developing, and making meaning out of this thing that we call the human experience. This passion led him back to school after his playing career finished, where he began work on a master's degree in psychology from Harvard and was part of the genesis for his co-founding of Delta Developmental, a consulting firm dedicated to optimizing leadership development for athletes, teams, and organizations through their Flow Dynamics lab and curriculum. His training program has contributed to championship teams at the highest levels of sport and countless executive leaders primed to experience life in flow. It's my pleasure to introduce to Omni Athlete the mission-driven athlete and awake entrepreneur, Trevor Tierney. Welcome to the show, Trevor.
Thank you, Josh.
So, there's a lot of places we could start, and we were just talking a minute ago off camera about the connection between alcohol and college kids and college athletes. And wasn't my intention, but I think that'd be a really energizing place to start, because a lot of times where we typically start is with identity for athletes.
Right.
So I would love to know just a little bit about the research you did, and also kind of let's weave that into the identity of a college athlete.
Yeah, so I just got done my master's thesis around looking at developmental maturity, resilience capacity, and alcohol use in college students and college student athletes. There's a lot of previous research that's been done around college athletes and some of the high-risk behavior with alcohol and substance abuse issues. And so I kind of wanted to see, okay, what are some of the protective factors that maybe we can focus on with college athletes and alcohol use? And also, one of my main focuses in my master's program was developmental maturity, looking at stages of adult development, learning more about that. So, really, found there is high alcohol use in college students and college student athletes, which is, I'm sure, no surprise to everyone. But found some interesting findings around, especially in the athletes, that resilience capacities were protective of for keeping them from higher alcohol use. So the athletes that scored higher on the resiliency scale that I used alcohol less. That did not appear with the college students, but yes, there were some really interesting findings, and just kind of exploring the topic was of great interest to me. I really hope that culturally we can make a shift in athletics where athletes can learn to drink responsibly and have a good time and be with their friends and have that camaraderie together, but not maybe get in some of the more precarious situations that we find athletes getting in. So I think it's an important topic for us to talk about with athletes and to explore and try to find ways to kind of change some of that cultural approach, because we're not quite succeeding yet.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? Like the resiliency and development, right? I'd love for you to dive into this a little bit, because I think what we take for granted, right, is the athletic, the sports container, right? The field can be such a brilliant opportunity for somebody to develop that resiliency.
Right.
But a lot of times it doesn't map outside of the sport itself, right? And as athletes, like we're so often either questioning why that's happening, or
right.
just, we're going through stuff where, in an obstacle off the field is something that, just stands in the way of everything, but if it's on the field, I can blow right through it. And it just seems like such a challenging dynamic.
Yeah, resilience is a huge kind of hot topic, I think, in sports today. A lot of people kind of make the assumption that athletics grows resilience just naturally, that we kind of absorb resilience through osmosis if we play in sports. But I would say that you would really have to focus on it and teach it as a skill. In some of the leadership and character development programs that I do with coaches and athletes, I try to break down things like goal achievement and resilience and integrity, things like this, so that they can be seen as skills rather than kind of these static characteristics or traits that athletes have. And coaches know how to coach skills. So if we can look at it as a skill, as how are we communicating resilience to our student athletes? How are we developing practices for resilience? How are we holding our athletes accountable? How are we developing a mindset around resilience? So, all of these things are really important for us to kind of explore as coaches and as athletes, because the interesting thing was in my thesis was that while athletes had higher resilience than the students, the athletes that had the most resilience were the freshmen in the group that I studied. So their resilience seemed to go down over time in college, not up. So there's some questions that asks. Do resilient people tend to become more elite level athletes, rather than does athletics build resilience? And my study was more was looking at correlation rather than causation. So I can't answer that question, but that finding that the freshmen were more resilient than the seniors kind of makes me raise my eyebrows a little bit and start to think, hey, we have to kind of inject our coaching or our approach to sports with some of these leadership or character skills. And one thing that I think about is, 30, 40 years ago, people weren't going into weight rooms and doing strength training. This was something that most athletes didn't know about. Bodybuilders did strength training, but suddenly people started to see, strength training equals performance on the field. What I'm hoping to get people to understand and realize and rally around is that leadership and character training leads to performance on the field. If you use the word mission-driven athlete in my introduction, and if you can help an athlete mature to become mission-driven, where they get up in the morning and eat healthy and go get a workout in and get their schoolwork done early in the week, then you're going to have an athlete that performs better on the field. Those are some of the things that I'm kind of looking at and exploring and trying to apply in the real world and see what happens.
It's so that notion, right? That and obviously, like you said, right? You don't know necessarily whether it's causation or correlation, right? But the fact that you could look at a group of young athletes who you expect to go through the process of playing, maturing, developing in college, like from the outside looking in, the expectation that a fan would have, that a parent, that a coach is going to have, is that those athletes are going to become more resilient. Right. The fact that they're not, that really creates, I think, an opportunity to ask those questions of, okay, so if that's not a given, right? What do we have to do within sport to make sure that is a given, that becomes part of it?
Yep. I would caution my study is only one small study of a small sample, so there could be different groups that you see different things. But yeah, it's not a given, and I completely that's one of my main points, is these things that we kind of accept in athletics as being part of the drill. I'm a little bit skeptical of, and I think but I should say on the reverse that, listen, I grew up with a coach as a father, and I believe in athletics more than anyone. And I believe it's a incredibly powerful container for educating and transformation and maturing young men and women, but we have to do it in a good way, and we have to do it in a conscious way, and we have to decide what are the things we want our kids to learn through sports, because we've all seen, coaches or programs or, even some of the things in the news coming out on some of these major athletic associations have done things in a very unskillful way with a lack of integrity, and those are the lessons that the athletes learn instead of the valuable lessons. So we have to, I think we have to reframe how we approach sports in our country, because I think we use professional sports as kind of our model, because we think, well, professional sports is the best, so that's the way it should be done. The problem people don't understand about professional sports, they do and they don't, but they're not aware of this, is that professional sports are transactional. If you're a great athlete, you make tons of money. If you win as a coach, you make lots of money, and you make the team a lot of money. It is a business at the end of the day, and everyone is in that business to win. The more they win, the more advertising dollars they get. It's just the bottom line of it. I don't think that has to trickle down to college, high school, and youth sports. I think we have to say, okay, that's a transactional business approach to sports. We're more of a transformational approach to sports, and how do we make sure we're using sports as an educational container rather than this transactional business? And there's some major differences in how you would go about doing that.
That seems like such a challenging process to manage too, right? Because you've got, for the young athlete, they see their idols that are the professional athletes, right? So they see them existing in that transactional environment, and from the outside looking in, thriving. Whereas as we're learning, right, that can be a very deceiving perspective from the outside in, right? And so I think, what would you say to that young athlete, whether they're idolizing a professional or whatever it may be, but they see those people that are in our world living so much in front of the camera that it looks like there's nothing that can be wrong, but we know that isn't necessarily the case.
Right. I talk about this. Small, simple examples, obviously, for young kids go a long way. And the first thing that I try to get young athletes to work with or think about is making this kind of developmental jump from just caring about themselves to caring about the team around them and their friends and teammates around them. And a lot of times in sports, we have this way of, we kind of have this group speak of, I just care about the team. We're just looking for the win. And it's like, I think you do, but there's a lot of people that are pushing for their own awards and achievements and playing time and things like that. So how do we get kids to really focus on the good of the team and putting others before self? And one thing that I talk about with kids is social media. Professional athletes will use social media in a way, they brand themselves basically, and they're advertising themselves, and there's kind of like, they're putting up clips and highlights and pictures of themselves, and I guess that's fine for what they have to do, but for young kids to see that, to me it feels it's a very narcissistic lesson for young athletes to learn of, like, oh, this is just about me, this is just about my highlights, and maybe I'm starting to sound like an old crotchety man, but social media is a tough challenge for young athletes. So, and then sometimes coaches. Another example would be sometimes coaches come to me and say, "Well, what do I say to the athlete that comes into me and says they want more playing time?" And what I say is, well, I think we can reframe and change that question for them, and it's like, instead of them making meaning around what they want out of the conversation, let's shift it to how they can help the team, and that might end up leading to more playing time. But the first focus is, what can I do to make the team better? So, the conversation I have with coaches is, I would say we're not having that conversation, but what I will talk to you about is what can you do to make the team better. So it's nothing mind-blowing, but it's just these small little shifts from getting away from the narcissistic approach to sports to putting the team first and putting self before others. And then the next jump, I would say, is for teams and coaches to make a shift towards not only thinking about themselves as a team, but thinking about the community that they're a part of, the university, the high school, the greater town or city that they're involved with. And a lot of teams, especially at the higher levels, can make a really great impact on their communities. So for coaches to challenge their teams to do that, I think is a great way to educate and develop young men and women.
It really changes the level of responsibility we have as coaches, right? So I think there's, and you talk about this in the different stages, the presentation that's on your website for Delta Developmental, right? So the different stages that we go through in development, if I know that as a coach, it changes the interactions that I have, right? Probably because I see the questions that are being asked, and maybe in that moment I can recognize that the athlete might not even be asking the question about themselves, but the question of, okay, I'm not feeling significant enough right now with what I'm doing, right? How, there are these different psychological heuristics that we use to ask questions that may not even really be what we're thinking about. Do you think that is something that as coaches we just have to take on a deeper understanding, especially at the youth and high school and college level, of what the human being that athlete is going through?
Right. The first thing that came up for me is when I first learned about developmental theory, I think I kind of wanted to beat people over the head with it because I thought it was so great and so mind-blowing. But I think, what I've realized is people don't quite like to geek out on it like I do, but what I think it is what you said, is it gives you a great lens for understanding people. And that's the most important thing, is developmental studies are not about how do I grow people from one stage to another. I think it's a great way to get curious about people and understand their meaning making, understand how they view their world, and be able to support them in a good way. So it would be valuable for coaches to understand their athletes in that way, and that's one thing that I think I help try to provide for coaches. And yes, I think, could you repeat the second part of your question?
Yeah, I think it was just that idea of the ownership that's required of coaching, right? I mean, there's there just is there's a deeper. What came to mind for me is that as you were sitting there talking, it's like it just made me feel this level of responsibility that I don't know that we all get into coaching or teaching with.
Right.
And suddenly you go, wow, like this is a person in front of me who, in a lot of ways, I'm shaping their worldview right now, right? I'm with them more than their family is at times.
Well, yeah, and that's the next conversation is there are coaches that make meaning around their world in different ways, and have there are very different levels of maturity throughout the coaching ranks. And I think that's one of the problems with professional sports kind of being the model is, you'll see, I've seen clips of 7-year-olds playing flag football, and the coaches walk out with their headsets on and their full apparel set, and it's like, and they're yelling at the kids and going crazy in a way that is fine for professional athletes, but it may not be applicable for 7-year-olds. So there's that. First of all, we have to be aware of where's the coach coming from, and how is he approaching his job, like you're saying. And I think it is a really valuable conversation to have with coaches and also athletic directors around their hiring process, and also on top of that, university leaders. So coaches get a lot of pressure at the college level, just like professional sports, to win games, because those athletic teams are kind of walking billboards for their university. So, but I think I work with this group called IEE in upstate New York, Institute of Excellence in Ethics. Matt Davidson's a really interesting guy, does great work, and one of the universities that he works close with is Le Moyne University, or I think it's Le Moyne College, but Matt Bassett's the athletic director up there, and his main focus is transformational approach to athletics, and helping the men and women there develop through their experiences. And so, you know, if an athletic director or university president can kind of put these goals first and foremost, first of all, it's going to lead to success on the field, no question. It's going to lead to a lack of major off-field problems, I think. This is obviously just theory, but I think you would see a downturn in some of the problems that you read about in colleges all the time, and you're going to get a much greater educational experience for your kids. And also, by the way, for athletic directors to know that donors and alumni eat this stuff up, so you can raise money off of it. So that's my new pitch. Yeah. If you don't care about the developmental approach to your athletes, then I can help you raise money.
You're throwing money out the door. Yeah. So let's talk about mission-driven athletes, right? That term. When, if you reflect on your career, when do you feel like you made, if it was a shift, or when you made the decision, I want to be a mission-driven?
So I would say, developmentally speaking, for myself, evaluating myself, I would say I'm still working on getting there. We came up with the term, Rob McNamara and I came up with the term mission-driven as kind of a translation for self-authored. So there's stages, one of the stages of development is self-authored, and it's a fairly high stage of development for adults. It's an adult that is able to kind of make their own mission and values and perspectives in the world, can kind of take from two different sides and come to their own conclusions, doesn't really get pulled into groups or just listen to an authority figure on things, is really oriented around creating his own perspectives in life. It's not to say that they can't get behind a team and be the self-authored leaders are very valuable for organizations, executive teams, athletic teams, but they don't just go to the group. So you're not going to see a self-authored leader be like, I'm Democrat, I'm Republican, or I'm this or I'm that. You know, like they're not very black and white. They have they can see all the shades of gray. And so we kind of came up with the term mission-driven as a way to kind of translate it to the athletic world, because some of the more academic jargon can kind of lose people a little bit and not be very interesting. So mission-driven sounded cool because we're like, you know, an athlete that's mission-driven is one that doesn't need his coach to tell him what to do. Tom Brady's like a very divisive figure, and I'm not the biggest Patriots fan in the world, but I look at that guy and I'm like, there's a mission-driven athlete. He really takes great care of himself through the off season. He does things in a different way. He has some of these, naturopaths working with him. He, eats really well. He's constantly studying, the game and getting better and better, and kind of does things his own way. And that's not to say he doesn't care a tremendous amount about the Patriots and his organization, but he kind of has his own way of going about things. And so a mission-driven athlete is kind of self-driving in that way. So, we say to college coaches, hey, wouldn't it be great if you could get a lot of your athletes to be mission-driven in a lot of ways, knowing full well that, on the more academic side, you're not going to get kids 18 to 21 all in that self-authored space, but you're going to get them to start thinking in ways of not needing to be told what to do by their coach, and also, not being swayed by peer pressure. So a self-authored, mission-driven athlete, if their teammates or some friends at college say, hey, let's go out on a Thursday night, they're going to be like, no, I have to make sure I'm ready to go on Saturday or whatever it is. So that's a little bit of what we mean by a mission-driven athlete. A mission-driven athlete would also care about their greater community, like I was talking about before, so that it's not just about the team and winning games. It's like, hey, how can I reach out to the inner city youth program in my area and help out and things like that. So To me, the value of a mission-driven athlete could be pretty amazing if we started to work towards that.
So let's go back to something you mentioned earlier about goal achievement and setting as a skill, right?
Yep.
So you've talked about this before in a different blog post, right? That there's this value in understanding the difference between process, outcome, right? And being able to find a balance there when you're setting goals. And as athletes, so much of when I reflect on my experience in youth and high school athletics, right? It is, whether intentional or not, it does become solely about outcome, right? It just becomes, that's the nature, whether it's how much weight did I lift, or how fast did I run my 40, or how many tackles did I get. I mean, like, there isn't necessarily, as I reflect, I don't know that I appreciated the constraints that puts on my ability to perform, right? At least, not to say that was the reason why something didn't happen, but you look at what we know now about the way we work as human beings. There's a different way to go about it.
Yeah. I love how you put that question. So this is something I learned from Matt Davidson and his group and their curriculum around goal. They call it goal achievement rather than goal setting. Everyone in leadership development talks about goal setting. And goal setting at the end of the day is writing down a list of things that you want to accomplish, which isn't a bad thing. We need to know the hurdles that we want to get to and the things we want to achieve, whether it's on the field or in competition or in life. So that's a valuable process to go through. Now, what is the skill that we have to develop to be able to reach those goals? I think a lot of elite level athletes are highly capable in the skill of goal achievement, but they don't know it. They don't know what it is quite, as object. So goal achievement in a way is more towards the process that you're talking about. How can we break down that goal into more, bite-sized steps that we have to take? So if I want to run a 6-minute mile, okay, what do I have to do today? Maybe today I just have to run a 400 in, a minute and a half, just as my first step to achieving that goal. And then, the process of monitoring that, revising that, having someone like a coach that supports and challenges me towards that goal. So some of the inner workings of that process of goal achievement, I think, are valuable to go through with athletes so that it's not just a one and done thing where we just sit down and set some goals and then go off with our day. And then the second part, one of the things I wanted to add is, I look back on my own career, and the things that I really remember are like those, doing that 9-minute mile and a half by myself in the middle of summer and just feeling miserable, but knowing that I was trying to work towards my goals of winning a national championship and, playing for some of the teams that I got to play for. It was like, I don't remember the wins and the achievements as vividly as I do some of those really challenging parts of the process. So it's interesting to think back, and I think I said this on one of our last interviews, but it's like the journey becomes way more valuable and memorable than the outcome itself.
It's flow, right? Like, so we've talked about this before, and I know that's a space that you've invested a lot of time, both playing and now in leading and coaching, right? But it seems so much of our audience and so many of the questions we get is, how do we develop more awareness, right? How do we find flow more readily? And at times, it feels like one of the biggest shifts that we have to make as competitors is just to become more aware of the process we're in. Right.
Well, I think Scott Ford, who I know is a part of the SEC and a lot of the work that you're aware of, and if no one's learned about Scott, I highly recommend checking out his site no matter what sport you play. I think it's tennisinthezone.com, and you could put it on the show notes, but Scott has done a tremendous job of studying flow and the zone over the years, and I think one of the most interesting things for me, I started working with Scott when about midway through my professional lacrosse career, and I started working with him because the guys in the MLL shoot the ball 110, 120 miles per hour from 10 yards away, 10 yards away, and I couldn't catch up with it. And I knew he worked with tennis players around seeing the ball in a different way, and I didn't realize I was going to go down this spiritual journey with Scott. But what was interesting was learning from Scott is being able to get in the flow is a lot, like you're saying, becoming aware of what's getting in our way of getting in that zone. And so I'm a little cautious of saying letting go of ego. I think that's a little bit oversimplifying it, but developing a healthy ego so that you're aware of the things you're trying to control and what you can control and what you can't.
Okay, so let's, one of the things that's come up a couple times as we've been talking, right, is control. And as an athlete, I wonder, and this I'm just kind of processing out loud a little bit, but like, we are oftentimes conditioned to crave control because as an athlete, that's like, our world becomes the sport, and it becomes everything we can do to find every minute thing that I can grab. Can I lift this harder? Can I
right.
And we were just talking about flow, and the nature of flow is to let go. That's tough.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot in sports that's, like I said before, paradoxical, and there are a lot of things in athletics that you are in control of, and I think that's one of the things that I love about sports in a way is like, if you want to perform well and you want to succeed, there are things you can do to get there for the most part. I mean, obviously there are going to be athletic barriers, I was never going to be, I loved playing football in high school, but I was a 180-pound outside linebacker. I was never going to be an NFL outside linebacker. But there are things that are in your control so that you can reach certain goals that you want to achieve in sports. And then the competition is where kind of the rubber meets the road and you get tested. It's one of the things I love. I know you're heavily involved in martial arts. I love about jiu-jitsu is there's no like pretending. You're on the mat and in jiu-jitsu, you either choke out your opponent or you get choked out. And there's
beauty in that.
Yeah, and you can get better at that and you can train but you got to show up on the mat for that. Where I see I notice other things in life where people kind of pretend and lie and deceive, and it's all kind of a show. And it's like in sports, there's like this reality to it that I think is really beautiful. But, to your point, it's like there are things in your control that you can do to make happen. And then at the same time, when you go out and perform, you kind of have to let go of a lot of that. I think that's kind of the progression of mastery is like, okay, working hard, controlling what you can control, doing all these things to get better, and then putting it out there and letting go of all that and just seeing what you can do.
So there's a couple things that come to mind. One is this nature of competition, right? And so martial arts is such a great metaphor, right? And just opportunity to understand a perspective around competition that if we grew up in most team sports isn't necessarily intuitive, right? It's not necessarily the way we look at, okay, in football, right? If I'm lining up against a tight end as a linebacker, I'm not typically lining up there saying, one, he's going to make me better in this moment.
Right.
Two, if I'm better, I'm going to make him better.
Right.
And three, I can actually love this person across the field from me that I'm competing against in this moment, and that it will both make us better, right?
Yep.
And competition as a path to flow,
right,
I think seems to go against what we usually think of, but it really has so much power.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. I look back at my career and some of the people that were like my biggest like nemesises in sports like have become my best friends, later in life, and they're really the ones that I look back and I'm like, man, without those guys and how great of players they were, I would have never had the chance to compete at that level, and I would have never had the chance to try to try to get better and get to be able to play against them is just an honor in itself. And so, yeah, there's kind of this like approaching competition where it's like, I hate these guys, I want to kill these guys. And I don't know, I think you know, there's, I forget his name. Do you remember him? He came to the SEC and talked about, he talked about in the NFL, loving his competition. And he was an old school guy. And early 60s, played in early 60s, I believe.
David Megacy.
David Megacy, exactly. And the NFL culture did not like that. And he was written off and I think kind of ushered down. And it's sad because he was, I mean, way before his time. I mean, even if he said that now, I think he would get some raised eyebrows. But yeah, if you learn to respect and love your competition, doesn't mean you're not going to go hard against them and block them or tackle them or do whatever you do in your field of competition hard. No. And that's what I love about jiu-jitsu. It's like I'm trying to arm bar this guy and take care of him at the same time. And he's trying to do the same, and we're both helping each other get better. There's a lot, I think, that team sports could take from martial arts in that way.
It almost speaks, you know, what jumped out at me right there is the notion of love itself, right? So this is a word that a lot of times gets manipulated in our culture, but truly one of the qualities of love in a just objective sense is wanting to make somebody better, right? Or wanting to challenge them, right? To be able to provide that space where they can blossom and become the best versions of themselves, and not doing it from a place of how it'll affect me.
Yep.
So if we just take that and map it to sport, it's never that easy, but it can be so beautiful, right? Because suddenly it's just about, I have to make that person better, because if I love my competition, what would I do besides that?
Right. Yeah, and I think there's kind of these extremes of competition versus cooperation, and there are these shades of gray in between. And I think you know, the conversation you raise is a very valuable one, because you could get a lot more out of competition if you learned to love and respect and care about your opponent, because you would know without this opponent, first of all, you wouldn't have the chance to compete at the level you're competing at, and you wouldn't be forced to push yourself to get better and achieve this higher hurdle. And yeah, it's an amazing experience. I think as an athlete, when at some point you have to retire from a sport you put a lot of years into, you really value those opportunities, and when you're going through it, you don't see some of these things. It's something, you know, one of the curriculum modules that we do, another one from IEE, is this idea of carefrontation. So instead of going into confrontation and conflict with this, oh God, this is a fight, I'm nervous about this, or I'm angry at this person. It's like going into that conflict with this idea of thinking about it as a win-win situation, and I care about this person, I want what's best for this person, I care about my team and what we want together, and how can we make this work for both of us. So, you know, sports, we always talk about how can sports translate to business life and real world life for the young men and women that are competing in them. And this is one of the ways, is how do we approach competition? How do we approach conflict? And what are some maybe more skillful ways to go about doing so?
So let's take a slight left turn, and I'm super curious, knowing the work and the research you're doing, that you've done, what was it like transitioning out of sport for you? So when your career ended, what was that process like, and specifically mentally and emotionally, right? What, you know, I think we have this expectation of athletes, right? You're on a pedestal for 3, 5, 10 years as the best maybe in the world at what you do, and then you just kind of disappear. Yeah. And there isn't necessarily a lot of recognition and awareness given to that reality for the human.
Right. Yeah, it was hard. I struggled with it, and I think that the challenging part is that, I think you said something along these lines before, is as athletes, especially when we put a lot of our lives into it, we tend to identify with only what we do on the field. So we tend to judge ourselves by how good or bad we are as an athlete. So it took me a while to kind of start to realize that my athletic identity wasn't everything that I am, and that I had other things to offer and do in the world. And it's one thing that I really want kids to understand now, starting at a young age, is like, hey, maybe you didn't play well today, but that doesn't mean you're a bad person. Or, hey, you didn't get to play in this game a lot, but that, doesn't mean you're not a great kid and you're not a great student, and there's not a lot of other things that you're very good at. So I think it's something for us as coaches and parents to keep an eye on, especially at a young age. It's a good thing that young athletes have an identity in sports. They get a lot of value out of that. They get a lot of confidence out of that, but they don't need to put all their eggs in one basket. And the other thing is we see this in the news and media, of this idea that athletes should just stick to playing sports and shut up and stay silent about other things. And it's like, some of the athletes and coaches that I know are some of the greatest leaders and smartest, most intelligent people in the world. And becoming a good athlete is not just about being physically good at a certain skill. You have to develop yourself in a lot of ways. And so I think athletes should understand that they have a lot to offer the world, and not just be athletes. There's a lot of value that they can bring to any conversation and any space if they put in the time to understand it better. So,
what do you think, if you reflect on whether it was while you were playing or in that time right post career, was there a person or a moment or just, it could have been the tiniest exchange that really made you say, wow, I've got my world wrapped around this one thing that I did, but that there's really something so much bigger here that I can step into? Was there something that kind of triggered that thought, or did it slowly build?
So it started to build towards the end of my career, where it was actually from learning from Scott about being in the flow. I kind of started to lose some of that identity from playing in sports and start to loosen that that overly just competitiveness, and I started to enjoy playing more and started to just enjoy the process of getting in the flow more, and see that it was hard for me because my father was a lacrosse coach, so it was all I really knew a lot of my life, and it was all I really wanted a lot of my life. And so just to kind of, I kind of broke free and left, after I graduated college, I moved down to Colorado and, just started to explore and learn new things. And I think that was part of my process of when I got done my career of wanting to go back to school and learn some new things and kind of go away from sports, learn some new things, and then come back to sports in my own way. So it's kind of, I think it's still an unfolding process for me.
Yeah. Okay, so before I ask my final question, where can our audience go if they want to connect with you online?
So it's funny. Online cracks me up. It's like social media is such a funny thing to me. But I'm on Twitter, Trevor_Tierney. I'm on Instagram, Trevor Tierney. My website for Delta Developmental, deltadevelopmental.com, that's where I do offer some information around what we do around our leadership and character development programs. We work for athletic teams, athletic departments, and some executive teams in the Colorado area. I'm looking to do more stuff and get our work out there with more athletic teams, and been spending the past 2 years like really getting my hands dirty with that work and starting to feel really confident with it. So if anyone wants to learn more about that. And then I'll also still do some work in the lacrosse world with LXTC Lacrosse, where we coach youth, high school teams, tournaments, camps, and clinics. So all of that information's at lxtclacrosse.com. Yep.
Okay. So this show is called I'm the Athlete, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the idea being we want to understand what it takes to be a mind, body, spirit competitor. So
right.
What does being an I'm the Athlete mean to you?
That's a great question. I think it's about understanding that, as we've talked about today, that athletics isn't just a physical practice where you just lift, you just practice your sport. Becoming an integrated athlete on all levels, mental level, physical level, emotional level, spiritual level, all of these different branches, if you can grow in these different ways, it's going to help you become a better athlete. I talk a lot to athletes about the power of a daily meditation practice, and it seems so simple, and if you actually do it, you'll see how hard it is. But the power of some sort of mental and emotional practice like that can take you a long ways as an athlete. So I think, your approach with I'm the Athlete is a very valuable one because for athletes to see that this isn't just a sport I play, this isn't just some sort of physical practice, it's much more than that. Can lead them to being much more successful on their field of play and successful outside of that. And I think that's one of the main messages that I'm trying to get across is, listen, sports are invaluable, and getting in the zone is an amazing experience, but how can you take that experience from sports and help bring back to your community, your village, so that you can make a good impact in your corner of the world. So hopefully, people take from that, because at the end of the day, it's great to win championships and awards and stuff like that, but it goes away. The shine wears off very quickly. And so, what are you doing your day to day that's making a good impact to make the world a better place is what it's all about.
It's awesome, Trevor. That is absolutely awesome. Thank you for being on the
Josh.
show.
Yep.
This is guys, as you take a moment to research Trevor and the work that he's doing, one of the things that I can't stress enough is you've got somebody here who literally was processing everything we just talked about in real time at the pinnacle of sport, right? And it didn't make him less of an athlete. It didn't make him less able to compete. In some ways, it made him a better athlete and makes him even stronger now than he was then. And you're going to see that when you really get to understand what it is that Trevor, the work that he does, that he's put together is absolutely incredible. I cannot stress enough. Dive deep into his world, what you guys are doing with Delta Developmental. Everything that's happening here allows us to really see sport not just as a thing that we do, but as a place for us to grow as human beings. And at the end of the day, that's what we're all here to do. So until next time. What is up, Omni Athletes? Thank you guys for watching another episode of Omni Athlete. If this content is adding value to your lives, guys, please like and share and subscribe in every way you can. Share our content. That helps us grow this community, which is really ultimately what we are after right now. So please like, comment, share, tell your friends about what we're doing. If it's adding value, please share it. And if it's not, tell us so we can really improve this content and make sure it's something that you guys want and want to see. Coming up, guys, in July, I'm super excited to announce we have the 2018 Sports, Energy, and Consciousness Festival. It's going to be in San Rafael, California. This is an absolutely incredible event for a lot of reasons. The main one being you get to actually engage with so many of the people that we've had on the show, so many of the leaders in sports, energy, and consciousness. The speakers are absolutely incredible, and the community is even more incredible. So I cannot encourage you guys enough. Get to this festival. It is going to be an experience that transforms your vision of athletics, your ability to achieve peak performance, to find flow, to awaken an expanded level of consciousness in your performance that you just cannot find anywhere else. It's truly the tip of the iceberg, and you guys want to be part of it. July 13th through 15th in San Rafael, California. Go to sportsenergyfestival.com to get your tickets today before they run out. It's going to go quick, guys. Get there. sportsenergyfestival.com, July 13th through 15th. We'll see you there.